you doing? Welcome back to another music theory ASMR video by myself, Beach ASMR. In today's video, we're going to have a look at the families and instruments of the orchestra. I've got the iPad with my PowerPoint here. We're trying out a new camera angle with my fancy new phone stand, and I really hope you enjoy wherever you might be having a study session. If you are just waking up, if you're trying to fall asleep, I wish you all the best. Today we're going to have a quick look at how the orchestra developed before a slightly more in-depth guide of the different instruments you might expect in the different families of the orchestra. Okay, so before we begin, we should know the following basics. There are 4 families in the orchestra that we talk about. We have brass, woodwind, strings, and percussion. Brass, woodwind, strings, and percussion. Okay, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, it was quite recently, in terms of human history, that orchestras were a defined term. If you think that people have been playing music in groups for just as long as humanity has existed, orchestra as a term only came about roughly kind of 400-ish years ago. Before that, especially kind of during the Renaissance, when the term orchestra came about, before that it was known as a consort. And we had Renaissance consorts, and they had instruments like the lute and recorders and kind of precursors to our Western instruments we know today. Okay, I think, and don't quote me on this, that these are a little bit after the time of instruments such as the hurdy-gurdy, but not too far off what we would now know. So these are consorts, okay? And the term orchestra only really kind of began to get introduced by Monteverdi, but before Monteverdi started to introduce an orchestra, we see like these lovely long instruments coming up here, this lovely lute. We used to call them consorts. A consort. And that was the term used kind of in the Renaissance. After that, we have the Baroque period, and that came about in roughly 1600 to 1750, and this is where we had our first ever defined orchestra. It was led by the harpsichord up at the front. Okay, and what I've got a picture of here is what maybe a concerto grosso would look like, which is where we have a large orchestra, and often the piece there's a focus on virtuosic instruments. So these are people who are really great and they show off at their instrument. Our orchestra already we can see would be aligned into this kind of semicircle shape with a central focus point, which at this point was the harpsichord. We'd have the first and second violins on each side, followed by the violas and cellos, the woodwinds, so our flutes, and then the bassoons, our brass over here, the natural trumpet, and percussion at the back with the timpani, and then the double bass, the harpsichord would be considered percussion because it has the use of hammers. Oh no, it's just plucked, isn't it? So maybe harpsichord strings. Ignore that, we'll ignore that. But in the Baroque orchestra, we had a nice semicircle. The semicircle, okay. The orchestra continued to develop, and we moved on to the classical period, and this is from 1750 to roughly 1820, okay? And this is when we had the likes of Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn. Here we can see that the orchestra is centered around a conductor and not a harpsichord. It was around this time that our orchestras also considerably grew in size. There could be roughly 60 to 80 musicians in an orchestra, absolutely massive. We see we've got many more violins, and they're now grouped together. We still have our violas, many more cellos, and now 3 or more double basses, lots of double basses. We'd see here we have the introduction of horns and tuned trumpets, not natural trumpets. We have some more individual woodwinds, the likes of flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. Okay, so a much bigger orchestra. Interestingly, we're still in this semicircle kind of setup, a semicircle kind of setup, so everyone can see the central conductor. Okay. Following the classical orchestra, we entered the Romantic period. And you can't see this as well, but this is where the orchestra reached its height. Around kind of the turn of the 19th century, we had these huge orchestras, as you can see, with lots and lots of violins. And we had an introduction of many more instruments with the tuba, bass trombones, more percussion as opposed to just timpani. We had harps being added. Huge orchestras in the Romantic period. And these were pioneered by composers like Berlioz, who's probably most famous for the Symphonie Fantastique, in which we have like program music being written where the orchestra told a story. These massive orchestras. Let's go through and see how many instruments we've got. We've got in the percussion 1, 2, 3, 4 percussion, 2 harps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 first violins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 second violins. We got our flutes, the oboes, the violas, the cellos. The double basses have gone from 1 during the Baroque period to now having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 double basses. So huge, absolutely massive orchestras which could play all sorts of amazing things. Again, centered around one single conductor. Okay. But now, let's have a look at what instruments you might expect to see in the individual families. As we said before, we have the strings, woodwind, brass, and percussion. First up, let's have a look at what string instruments you might expect in a modern or romantic orchestra. Up, playing the highest pitch, we have the violin. There are 2 groups of violins in the orchestra, first and second. After the violin, we have the viola. feel like the viola always gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes. Interestingly, the viola doesn't actually play in either the bass or treble clef. It plays in the... is it tenor or is it alto? I'm gonna look like an idiot now. Essentially, I can draw it on some paper for you, hang on. The bass clef, it plays on, sorry, not the bass clef. If you imagine that this is my stave, let's draw like a stave. The viola plays. This is where I look like an idiot forgetting what the clef looks like. So middle C is on the middle line. That's how similar. It's a really crude drawing, but that middle line is. The middle line is middle C, and that's what the violas play with. Okay, that's the violas. A little techno mishap, but we're back. After the viola, we move on and we have the cello. The cello, which goes a little bit deeper in pitch, a little bit bigger, a really quite beautiful and versatile instrument. I love composing for cello, and I think a great cello player is really quite valuable. And the deepest in pitch and largest in size instrument we have in the string family is our double bass. So we have violin, viola, cello, double bass, which would sound very deep and powerful. Okay. Next up we have the woodwind, and there is a lot of instruments in the woodwind family. Some are not actually pictured here because I don't think you'd find them in a orchestra. Starting off light, we have the piccolo, which is often used to depict like fairies or anything lightly hopping around would be a piccolo. And we have the flute, slightly deeper, still very high, very famous. Next up we have the oboe, which is where we start to use reeds, hence the name woodwind because they use the wooden reed, and the bass oboe. Following on from that, we see the clarinet. Now the clarinet is of course made famous by the fact that Squidward plays it in SpongeBob, so the clarinet is what Squidward plays, and also Summer in the School of Rock. The bass clarinet comes after that, followed by the bassoon, which is in most small size orchestras the lowest woodwind instrument. At the bottom we have the contrabass clarinet. This is the woodwind family. I've never played a woodwind instrument. Maybe I should start at some point, who knows. Following on, we have a much smaller section. We have the brass section, led by the trumpets, followed by the French horn, the trombone, and the tuba. Of course, the brass section is known for its very royal, regal, proud, bright sound, also providing very dramatic drones and such. Brass instruments made out of metal, using valves or sliders, where the player can also control their embouchure, which is how you kind of position your mouth. It's a really oversimplified way of saying it. the brass instruments. Finally, we have the percussion section. One thing that surprises a lot of people is to see the piano in the percussion section. It is said that to be a percussion instrument, you must make the sound by striking the instrument. With a piano, technically you strike the instrument by hitting on the keys, and also the keys activate a hammer which hit a string, making the sound within the piano, which is why we see the piano in the percussion family. Other pitched instruments include the xylophone and the timpani. Reliably, the following instruments are not pitched, and that could be claves, triangle, snare drum, cymbals, tambourine, maracas, and bass drum. Okay, and there we have it. A pretty simple ASMR guide to the orchestra. Just to recap, we have got 4 different families: the strings, the brass, the woodwind, and percussion. 4 different families. Okay. The term orchestra kind of first came about with Monteverdi in the late Renaissance. Before that, we had consorts. Our first orchestras were the Baroque orchestras, and they were very small. And they grew to their peak during the Romantic era, where there would be well over 100 musicians in an orchestra. Wonder if we can go back here. So let's have a look. This is my Baroque orchestra. I'm not sure if this is an accurate diagram of how many, but you maybe have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1 really clear as being 1 double bass, and 9 kind of sections. And it grows dramatically. We've got the introduction of multiple timpani, multiple double bass, multiple trumpets, and tuned trumpets, not just natural, to a peak in the Romantic era. Look how many instruments we have here. Just many, 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 many instruments, allowing us to do wonderful, wonderful things. Well, there we have it. I really hope you enjoyed this ASMR guide to the orchestra. And if you'd like to know anything a little bit more in depth, do let me know. I'd be really happy to make a video on that. I've got a few on my list at the moment. Well, I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful night, evening, day, or study session, and I'll see you later. Bye bye for now.